there's a liquor store over on Joy Road, and we used to walk from Heritage Place apartment building over to that store because it was closer. And there was one down on Grand River too at the corner. And when we first got there, we went to that a few times, but that's a long stretch. Where we thought the one on Joy Road was a little closer. So we started going to that one. And I remember one time his friend and his old lady had went around there. And they used to just go there just for lottery tickets, alcohol, or cigarettes or something like that, because they would always go to the grocery store if they was going to get food or something. But anyways, they had walked around there one night, and a dude tried to rob them. His name was Les. And this dude tried to rob them, but he always carried a pistol on him. So the dude wasn't able to get anything, but before the dude had a straight razor, and he swung it at him a couple times, and then he got hit on his arm up by his shoulder with the straight razor. And then he had came back and came to the apartment we was at, the manager's apartment, and she was I think she called. I don't know if they called an ambulance or if he just tied something around it, because that's the way them guys was. They were, they were tough, but they were dumb. You know what I'm saying? Because you can be tough and dumb at the same time. But because they would do things like that if they got cut or whatever. It would have to be a life or death situation back in them days for people to go to the hospital. Nowadays you got people going to the hospital for everything, just every little thing they'll run to the hospital or something, or the emergency room or something. Back in them days, people didn't do that, It'd have to be a life and death situation for you to go to the hospital. So I don't remember if he called the ambulance and went to the doctor, or if he just wrapped it up. My guess is he wrapped it up. I just don't remember exactly what happened after the fact. But that was just one incident they had. And then they had another incident, but I wasn't near. They was telling me about it because I had went home. And when I went back out there, Ron was telling me that him and his stepdad had walked down to Grand River to that liquor store. Then they had one right there on Grand River, but then if you walk about 2 blocks over on Grand River, there's another liquor store. But anyways, they walked to this one at the corner, and it was, in behind it had like a abandoned building and stuff. And the windows, they had some big windows like it used to be a business or something, but it was abandoned, and a lot of guys would hang out in there drinking, whiskey or wine or whatever, and just shooting the shit or whatever, and that's just where they hung out. Basically, probably get away from their girlfriend or their wife or whatever. Just a bunch of dudes hung out in there. And but anyways, he was telling me that they had walked down to the liquor store, and there was 2 guys that they had wanted. These 2 guys tried to rob them, which that wasn't gonna happen with these guys, And but they was trying to rob them, and they got into a scuffle. Then he said that one guy had a stick, so right there at that abandoned place that I was saying, there was a bunch of loose rocks just laying all around, where people been demolition over there and stuff in that abandoned business. So he said they just grabbed some bricks, because they had sticks, and started, chunking them at them. Then they was picking up bricks and chunking it at them. So, and they got hit with a few bricks, and other guys got hit with a few bricks. But then they finally, went on about their way and stuff. And I guess they just seen that robbery wasn't going to take place, And that just goes to show you there's been a lot of robberies in Detroit. And some, people, carry it out, and some people attempt to do it, and it just don't work out the way they planned, And that's just the way it goes sometimes. Because these guys, you wasn't gonna be able to rob them without taking them out, And they was telling me about it, and they would laugh, and Ron was laughing about it, and he was telling me about it. And he was showing me marks on his arms and stuff like that where they hit him with the brick. And then, he said he hit a guy in the head with a half a brick. He said when I did that, they both just took off running, But that just goes to show you that, all money's not good money. Because them guys was trying to do a robbery. It didn't work out too well for them, And that kind of stuff back then, it happened all the time in the city, in different areas, you know what I mean? And but they were telling me about it, and I thought it was funny, because he was laughing about it and showing me the marks on his arms and stuff like that. And I told him, I said, you better be glad it didn't hit you in the nugget, He was like, no, I was ducking and dodging and stuff like that. And so were they, but he said, I finally made a connection with one of them. He said he had a half of a brick. And he made a connection with one of them. Then after he hit that dude, they both just took off running and left, But and most of the time, these guys, they most of the time they had knives and guns and stuff like that. But back then it wasn't like today. Somebody will pull out a gun quick today, whether they're going to shoot somebody or not. You know what I mean? But back then, there wasn't nobody pulling no gun out unless you was getting shot. That was what it was. If somebody pulled a gun on you, you can count on you getting shot or shot at. But nobody's going to just pull a gun and just threaten you. In today's time, you got a lot of people just pulling guns, and they just pulling guns maybe because you stole their parking place or something like that. Just something crazy, and they just doing it because they got a gun, basically. And then most of the people wouldn't even shoot you. They got a gun, they wouldn't shoot you. So, but that's just a gamble that somebody would take, But back then, people carried guns and knives and stuff like that, and people wouldn't even pull a knife on you not unless they was going to cut you. You know what I mean? This is a different time today. Not saying nobody won't shoot today or nobody won't cut nobody today, but I'm just saying back then versus now is night and day. But anyways, there's stories like that happen a lot, The one time his mom was in her bed, it was on the weekend, and she was reading a book. And me and him was in the living room, and all of a sudden we heard glass break, and then she comes out of the bedroom, and she says, somebody just threw a brick through the window. And but she said she looked out, she seen it was a boy that lived down the road in another apartment building. So she showed us who he was, and then her son Ron said, well, next time I see him walking down the street, I'm going to confront him and see what his problem is. So one time we're walking to the store, and he's walking toward us. And then he says, there's that boy through the brick through the window. So he stops him, and this guy Ron, and like I said, he's 30 years old, but he looks scary, you know. And so he confronted the boy, and the boy said, "Well, I was just messing around. I didn't mean nothing by it." And then he turned around and he told him, he said, "Well, if you want to do some work with us and stuff like that, and make you some money, you know, I'm gonna talk to my mom and see if I can get her to let you help us do some work in the building, and you can stay out of trouble or stuff like that." And then that dude was like, "Yeah, I'm good with that," you know. At first, he was real scared because you got to think, you know, if a 30-something-year-old guy comes up to you and he looks scary, stuff like that, you're going to be nervous, you know. And he was nervous, but then he was cool after, you know, Ron had a talk with him. Then when he actually started doing some work with us in the building, he was all right then. But he was just messing around and did that through that brick, but, you know, after that, he was good, you know. He was just glad he was making some money then. But they finally got that building squared away and got it all boarded up. It took a while, though, to get all the windows boarded up. Then they painted the boards black. They might have painted them dark brown. It was black or dark brown. I'm not for sure. Then they put fence around the front of the building, you know, and that was just the purpose because people were hanging out in front of the building on the grass part, you know, sitting in chairs and stuff like that. There wasn't nothing wrong with that, but the problem was is they would like party and all that, and then they would just leave their garbage out there in front of the building, like, you know, wine bottles, beer bottles, liquor bottles, potato chip bags, just whatever, just left their garbage. And then we'd have to go out there and pick the garbage up all the time. So that's the purpose of putting that fence in front of the Heritage Place apartment building. And, you know, then there was a lot of people that would hang out in the lobby on the staircases, you know, going out the front door. And then I remember one time his stepdad, which was the manager, we're all coming in from, we was gone somewhere and we was coming in, and like a whole group of people sitting on the steps. And then he was like, and they was like, "How y'all doing?" All that. And he was like, "Hey, I don't mind y'all hanging out in this lobby and sitting on these steps and, you know, conversating and stuff like that. But if don't leave no trash and stuff in the lobby. If you got any garbage or anything like that, pick it up when you leave, you know." And he said, "If you want, I'll put a garbage can out here, but I just don't want people leaving garbage all over the place because then we got to go behind them and pick it up, you know." And at this time, he had good tenants and stuff like that, so they understood, you know, and they was like, "Yeah, we'll make sure it's cleaned up and everything like that." So that building ended up being, it was probably listed as the worst building in that area, and it ended up being a good building in that area. And then a lot of people wanted to actually move over there because not only did they keep it up to par as far as painting and clean apartments and all that, and then if the carpet needed changed, they would have new carpet put in and stuff. I mean, they really took care of this building. And so they had people just lining up wanting to, you know, rent an apartment there, stuff like that. But it ended up being a lot of, you know, good people that moved in the building and stuff like that. I remember one time me and Ron, we had went uh, up to the second floor, and it was a dude that he was talking to every time, in passing and stuff like that. He lived in the building, and one Friday he seen us, and he was like, "Hey y'all!" He had a bag, and he had liquor and a grapefruit juice and stuff like that. He was like, "Hey y'all want to come up to the apartment and have a drink?" And then Ron was like, "Yeah, we'll come up there." And so we went up there, and this dude had his apartment laid out. It was like, nice and clean and stuff like that. And he had it hooked up. So we had a few drinks up there with him. He was a cool dude. And he was just telling us, what he was up to that day and where he's been and all that, just conversating. And he was telling Ron how he was glad that they got the apartment building up to par and all that. And he said he was telling us he could remember before we even got there to take care of the apartment building, how bad it really was. And then he said he is real glad that, we got it all straightened up, cleaned up and all that. And he said, I was thinking about moving out of this place, but now that y'all here, I'm definitely staying. So he was a cool dude. And we hung out there for a little while and stuff like that. Then what it was is over time, we made friends with the tenants in the apartment building. So anything they would see that was going wrong or see somebody doing some crazy stuff or whatever, and we didn't catch it, they would let us know. So when you got eyes and ears throughout the whole building, on different floors and stuff like that, it really helps to run the apartment building efficiently. You know what I mean? And so that really helped out. And then also Joe Hergy, the one that owned Heritage Place apartment building, he owned a lot of buildings, and he was an Italian guy. But he owned a building over off of Woodward Avenue. It's like on the other side of town in Detroit. And in this building, I stayed over there with my ex-brother-in-law at this apartment building. And I stayed over there not long, some months, but it wasn't that long. And he had that building right there. He had to get a little bit sorted out, and but he didn't spend nowhere near the money that they spent on Heritage Place. And it could be because I don't know why he would, he just didn't go above and beyond. But it could be because he didn't really ask for much at the building. So, he stayed there for quite some time. I was there for maybe 3 months, maybe. And a lot went on while I was there. And I talk about this building in one of my other videos and stuff like that. And but I was just so used to, Trumbull Avenue and Grand River and Joy Road and all that over in that area. And then I was ready to go back. And I had left I'd say about 3 months later, I left from there. But he got that building squared away also. But, like I said, the owner didn't, I don't know if he asked for much at that building, but it just didn't seem like the owner put a bunch of money into that building like he did the other building. But that was just another building of his that I had stayed in, and stuff like that. But then started working down on Cass Avenue. Well, actually, I lived on Cass Avenue for a while, and when I was living over on Cass Avenue, this is when we seen that dude get ran over by a car, and he got ran over, then he got hung in behind the back tire on the passenger side. He got hung somehow around the tire, and he was stuck in the wheel well of the tire. And the dude, me and my brother was up on top of the roof, and it was like the building was like 4 or 5 floors tall, but it had a window on the living room window where you could open. It swung open. You can go out on to the roof, and then underneath it, I think it was closed, but it probably used to be a business or whatever. But we used to sit out there on the roof, and a lot of hookers used to hang out in front of that building. So we would just like hang out there, smoke, and talk to the hookers and stuff while they was waiting on somebody to come pick them up. And one time we're out there, and this guy's trying to cross the road, and a car comes through, and it hits dude, and he gets hung on the wheel, and the guy kept smashing the gas. I guess he was trying to get the body off the car or whatever, but it was hung. So dude just put the car in park and got out the car and just took off running. I don't know if they ever caught that dude or whatever, but that dude that was hooked in the back wheel, they ended up calling a morgue to come and get him because he was dead. You know. They also had this place, this is many years back. They had this restaurant on Cass Avenue, and this restaurant had a basement in it. And this dude, he used to sell cases of canned foods to people, like cases of chili and just all kind of good canned food he would sell right out. It was just a hustle that he had. He would sell them right out from the restaurant basement. And he would sell them to people, for money or for food stamps or whatever. And people would buy them because it was a lot cheaper than, getting it from the grocery store. So whether it been, hot canned foods or what, that's what dude used to do years ago. And he had a lot of customers because a lot of people jumped on that deal because it was just a good deal to get, and it was cheap, And back then, on people used to buy a lot of different things with food stamps and stuff. Food stamps in Detroit City was same as cash money. You know what I mean? You might not believe that, but that's true. And people from Detroit will tell you the same thing. It's food stamps like cash in Detroit. And people used to buy all kind of stuff with food stamps. It's just the way it was back then. It was a long time ago. But and on Cass Avenue, when I stayed there was two dudes that lived in that building, and everybody used to park in the back of the building, and it had people would park in the back of the building, and then I don't know if you know this, but sometimes in Detroit back in the day, I don't know if they do it today or not, but back in the day, if a bunch of people lived in an apartment building, just say that, and everybody parked in the back. Once you had your spot, people would claim that spot. So if they left and came back and another car was in the place they normally park in, it was going to be a problem. You know what I mean? And that's just the way it was back then. They even did that on the streets, you know, with people park in front of their house. They would, like, in the winter, they would shovel their parking place out. But if they left and they came back and another car was there was a problem. You know what I mean? They would go up to the people's apartment or house or whatever and tell them, you know, hey, I've shoveled this place out for my car and now you parking in it. So it would end up being a problem if they didn't move their car. And that's just the way it was back then. But anyways, these two guys, one guy had left. This guy came back, and they was fighting over the parking place is what it was. And they had words and stuff like that. Then they ended up, you know, back then a lot of people back then would have like buck knives. If you don't know what a buck knife is, you can look it up. But they would carry buck knives, and then they would carry a gun too, like, you know, 25 or something small, you know, it wouldn't be a real big gun. And a lot of people carried stuff like that back then. But anyways, like I told you, previously, in them days, if people pulled a knife or a gun, it was going to be used. There wasn't no threatening, you know, back in them days, or trying to scare somebody or something like that. It just wasn't happening back in the day. Anyways, these two guys, they both had buck knives. They're on the staircasing of the apartment building. First, it started out by the cars, and then it went up the steps, and they're still going at it with each other and stuff like that. When they both pull out knives, and they start swinging on each other with these buck knives, and they're actually connecting to each other. And they actually cut each other so bad that both of them had to go away in an ambulance. And then after it's all said and done and they get to the hospital, the one guy, and they get cut up real bad, both of them, you know. And the one guy said when he woke up, he looked beside him, and the guy that he had got into a knife fight with was right beside him. So his wife, you know, because they didn't know at the hospital, you know what I mean? In Detroit, they ain't no telling how many cut victims they would have come in a day, and how many shot victims they would come in a day. You know what I mean? So they didn't really know. So they had put them in the same room together, and it was just an accident, basically. But they was both, you know, took care of and stuff like that, and then they had them both in the same room. So when the guy opened his eyes and he realized that, you know, the guy that he got in a knife fight with was right beside him, he told his wife to tell the nurse that they had to move that guy out of there, or it's going to be another problem inside the hospital. That's just the way it was back then. It was just wild. Some things that you could hear, you know, that you just will not believe. You know what I mean? And on my channel, in my stories, you're going to hear a lot of that. So, you know, that being said, if you watch this video this far through, you need to go ahead and subscribe. It don't cost you anything. Hit the like and the notification bell. And every time you watch a video, always hit the like button. And the notification bell, I'll let you know each time I post a video up. But anyways, they moved that guy out of the hospital room, stuff like that. But that just goes to show you that things like that, that's how far it went over a parking place, And, it just ended up being a knife fight, and then both people almost died, you know what I mean? That's how severe and bad it was. It was so bad they had to get stapled together, not stitched up. Well, I think they got some stitches, but they also got staples too, And that's how bad it was, So, but they were serious in Detroit about a parking place. They serious in Detroit about anything. And I'll be the first to let you know that. So if you ever go to Detroit, it's cool to go there and visit or whatever. But if you ever go there, just keep in mind that, respect goes a long ways in Detroit City. And there's zero toleration for disrespect. So just keep that in mind. Detroit's a good place to go and visit or whatever, but just go there with respect, But after this happened, this dude, he gets healed up, another guy gets healed up, and they both move out of this apartment building. Because there was no way that they was going to be able to live in the same building without something popping off again, So they both had moved away, And so that was probably a good thing on both parts, because one guy probably saved one guy's life and the other guy decided to move too, and he probably saved the other guy's life. So you just never know, in that predicament, both parties made a good choice just to move away, And I doubt either party was scared of either person. You know what I mean? It was just a decision they made, which was a good decision. So, and that ended that there. Then I also remember there was a dude that lived on the first floor, and he had got this big dog, and he went to work one time, and he lived in a back apartment, and he had a big window, like a big picture window, kind of like at the back of the building, and this dog, I guess he got tired of being in the house or whatever. He had him locked in the apartment. And I want to say I think he went somewhere that was going to be gone for, 3 days or a week or something. But he had left the dog in there. And don't you know, this dog ran and leaped and jumped right through that window out, to get out of that apartment. So, and then, who knows what the dog was thinking. The dog was probably thinking that, he just got locked up. I mean, he not see nobody coming back to the apartment or something. So, I guess the dog's going to try to do a breakout any way he can, and that would be for a dog that was, if you lock a dog in the backyard and you got a fenced in yard and then you don't come around or anything, like say you took off on vacation or whatever, and you left them food and water and stuff, but if they don't see you around, they're going to end up jumping over the fence or digging a hole under the fence or something like that. And that's just a dog's nature, he's just not going to be uh, locked up like that and then with nobody coming around. But I thought that was crazy that the dog jumped right through the window and stuff like that. But I guess he was just tired of being locked in that apartment. So when the dude did come home, he was like, "Who broke out the window?" We said, "That dog you had locked in that apartment, he jumped right through the window." So needless to say, you don't have that dog no more. So that dog probably ran away and got a better home or whatever. But that dude was a trip stuff. We didn't know him, but we knew of him, and he was like a guy in this building. Joe Hergy owned this building too. Same guy that owned them other two buildings I'm talking about, and he owned this building, but he used to let this guy carry a bunch of cash, but it wasn't his money. It was Joe Hergy's money, and he would carry a bunch of cash. So if they needed some, and Joe couldn't come to bring no money, this dude would have some money to buy whatever they needed: paint, carpet, whatever, a window fix, whatever. So he let this guy hold quite a bit of money, but this guy was he had a bad habit of going around and just. I'm sure somebody probably got him down the road, after the fact. But he had a bad habit of like showing off his money, but it really wasn't his money. It belonged to the owner of the building, and he would just like, whatever he was doing, conversating with somebody or something, he would talk about, how much money he makes and all that, and he would act like he just, loaded, and he would open his wallet and he said, "See, this is my check I got last week and I ain't spent none of it," just things like that, just somebody just showing off. And but we used to always say somebody's gonna rob him one day because he liked to show off his money too much, and it really wasn't his money to be showing off. So, you know, and I'm sure if the owner of the building knew that he was doing that, he would probably find another person to give money to handle the day to day activities. But this guy was a character. But for one, he didn't know how to manage money, and he didn't know how to handle a dog because his dog jumped out of the window of his apartment. So this guy was something else. But anyways, him going around showing his money like that to everybody, we used to always say he's going to show the wrong person one time, and they're going to take that wallet from him because it was full of money. You know what I mean? But he was just one of them people that just like to show off. And but that was a trip. I remember one time we were staying there, and there was a dude that lived across the hall from us, and he used to beat on his old lady all the time. He's one of them guys. And one time they were fighting. He was beating her up or something. She come to our apartment, beating on the door, talking about help, get him, whatever. And anyways, he come running after her. She got loose from him. She ran back into the apartment, and then we was like trying to cool the situation down. He was chasing her around the table. She was running in circles around the table. We finally got dude cooled down, and what his problem was, he was just well intoxicated and stuff, and he was just trying to beat up his old lady or something like that. It was kind of crazy. But we got him situated and calmed down and stuff. Then he, let her be. But once we went back to our apartment, we was like, man, that lady needs to get rid of that dude. You know, but back in them days, sometimes the women they would get their butt whooped and stuff by the man they was with, but they would just stay with them. And some women would break away from it, but most women they would just like stay in the situation. So a lot of people back in them days, when they would see something like that, they wouldn't even get involved in it because they know that the lady's just gonna stay with the dude no matter how many times they get into a fight and stuff like that. I'm not saying us, I'm just saying people in general. They would just not get involved in it. So that was some crazy stuff right there. Then one time we started doing some work at this hotel right off of Cass Avenue called the Willard Hotel.